our agenda for today. We're going to go over commercial audio and retail audio, factors to focus on while designing it, or questions to ask. We'll do a design walkthrough, some product recommendations, and a technical sound and some technical sound principles upon it. So it all starts here. TOA has a form you can fill out for a free design consultation, where we can help you design your project. So the main audio features needed in an office and warehouses typically tend to be paging systems and background music, either one of the two or sometimes including both of them. But one thing to consider is where will the system be used? Generally, if it's going to be used indoor or outdoor, that'll make a huge difference. If it's going to be just an office room, if it's going to be a large indoor space, maybe a recreational indoor area, and what kind of areas are going to need paging. Another thing to think of is how loud will the system need to be? So what's the ambient noise level? Because you want your, for example, if it's going to be background music, you want your background music to still be heard, but you might not want it to go over everyone where they can't hear each other. Or more often not, if it's paging, you want your paging to be heard all the time. So if you know how loud it's going to be within that room, your paging will always be louder than it and it will be heard. All right, so how will the speakers be utilized? This is important to think about is because the speakers, they can be in the ceiling, they can be in the wall, they could be just flung. So depending on how they're going to be used, if you're going to need a subwoofer, that will also matter as well. The frequency response, if you're playing more background music, you want a better frequency response than paging. The power and distance required for it, and the dispersion angles of the speakers. Another thing to think about is how much power are you going to need? So depending on the number of speakers you have and depending on the number of speakers you have and what they're tapped at, that will determine really how much power they're going to need. And typically for these applications, your wire gauges will fall between 14 and 16 gauge. Again, if it's going to be further away, the thicker the wire, the better. If it's closer, you don't need such a big wire, so you get go higher in gauge. So the wire gauges do differ. We do have a chart that you can refer to. It'll show the distance and the type of wire you want to use. So another thing to look at now will be at the sound sources. What kind of sound sources are they requiring? Is it going to be a microphone? Is this microphone going to need phantom power? Because that is a big difference if you need phantom power or not, as some amps will give you phantom power, some won't. Is this telephone paging? By telephone paging, meaning are they calling it from a landline or are they going to be using a VoIP phone? Is it just a music source? Will this music source be from a phone, a tablet? Will it be maybe just a music player? Anything like that? Or are you going to have a pre-recorded digital messenger? Or maybe you just have tones that will need to be played. Point is, all these are just different sources, so you need to consider what kind of sources you need. And then if these sources require muting or not. So in most cases, paging will always have priority and will mute the background music. In other cases, you might want background music to mute a page for some reason if they want to be different in any sort of way. So brief description, sound pressure levels, we express them in decibels. Right? The decibels, generally when we measure sound decibels, when we have it at 0 dB, that's not being heard at all, from 140 dB, which is permanent hearing loss. For example, 30 dB, think of that as soft whispering, someone talking very lightly. It's not very loud. It's very soft. 50, you got private business office. So inside the office, the ambient noise 50 dB, that's about the loudness you hear in an office typically. Jumping to, if you go to traffic can get quite loud, maybe downtown. So you got 90 dB. And if you're in a concert, say a rock concert, a great concert, anything like that, and you're hitting 115 dB, maybe even louder, depending on the concert. But one thing to keep in mind is that your ears will hear an interval of 3 dB. If you're going up 1 dB, 2 dB, you're not going to hear that difference. If it's 3 dB or greater, you will hear that our ears can perceive 3 dB and greater of noise change. All right, so speaker sensitivity. This specification indicates how effective a speaker is at producing sound. So a good way to think of it is speakers that were generally 1 watt per 1 meter. And then, well, if we double the distance, the dB level goes up from 3 dB. So if you look down at the bottom where it says example, at 1 watt, we're using 90 dB. If we're 2 watts, that's doubling it. So the increment will be 3 dB. So we're 93 dB. Double the 2 watts to 4 watts. Again, that's doubling it once more, making it 96 dB. And you double it once again, you continue the same pattern, going at 99 dB. So what it has in common is every time we double our wattage, our dB is increasing by 3 dB. And how much you can hear is 3 dB, and we're increasing by that much. Vice versa when it comes to loss of volume. So again, in this example, we have 1 watt for 90 dB. That's at 1 meter. At 2 meters, we're going down, and that's changing now by, instead of 3, we're changing it by 6 for this case scenario. And now once again, 4 meters, we're going down another 6, so we're doubling it. So our increments are 6 dB. And 8 meters, that's another double from the 4. And so we're at 72 dB. For a simple example, we're calculating the SPL. Calculate the SPL at ear level for a 90 dB, 1 watt per 1 meter speaker mounted in a ceiling 6 meters high. First, you calculate the on-axis SPL at a distance of 4 meters. That's ear level, pretty much. When the speaker is driven with 1 watt, SPL, which equals the sins, subtract the distance. So the SPL equal 90 dB, subtract 0 dB equals 90 dB. That's our 1 meter reference. The SPL equal 90 dB, subtract 6 dB equals 84 dB. That's going to be our 2 meters. The SPL equals 84 dB, subtract 6 dB equals 78 dB. That will be our 4 meters ear level. Note, every time we double the distance, 6 dB was subtracted from the reference. The design calls for 84 dB at ear level. Now we calculate the power required. So 1 watt equals 78 dB at ear level. 2 watts would equal 78 dB plus 3 dB, which would equal 81 dB. 4 watt equals 81 dB plus 3 dB equal 84 dB. 8 watts equals 84 dB plus 3 dB equal 87 dB. 16 watts equals 87 dB plus 3 dB equal 90 dB. It will take 4 watts of power for the speaker to produce 84 dB at ear level. Select the 5 watt tap on the speaker, but do note every time we double the power, we add 3 dB. What happens off axis? We see that sound pressure levels decrease as we move away from the speaker. Volume levels decrease even more when we move off axis from the speaker. Speaker manufacturers define the coverage axis based on when the speaker level off axis drops 6 dB from the on axis response. Suppose the coverage specification for the speakers was 60 degrees, horizontal at 2000 Hertz. This means that the off-axis volume levels are down 6 dB, 30 degrees each side of the on-axis response in the horizontal plane. Why is this important? Well, knowing the off-axis response of the speakers and the amount of even coverage required for the application will determine how many speakers and what the spacing will be between speakers. The similar the spacing, the more even the sound level between speakers will be. Ideally, you do want your sound levels to be fairly equal, so it sounds about the same all over. There are cases where some areas you don't want it to be heard, so then you could take that into consideration as well. So some TOA equipment suggestions. In the office, you see you can have a PC 580 with the back box, and generally they might want to use Bluetooth maybe. The warehouse area, if you see here, you will have generally horns. The warehouse is a very high ceiling. Warehouses normally don't really have background music, but they will have paging. And this paging, you can page from this PM660U mic or the phone you see down below. And in the middle, you have possible head ends. You might have the 9000 M2 or the M8080. So here, this is an example of a line riser for a warehouse. So you have the either like a SIP phone or PBX going to the 9000 M2. And from there, you might have maybe 3 zones. So this warehouse might have an office. So you see the two PC580 RUs. That could be a small little office area. And then going off the DA250 FH, you have one PC580. That could be maybe another dedicated, just one room office. And from there, you have the horn speakers, which would probably be the actual warehouse itself. So in this example, this is controlling maybe about 3 zones. So in this example of this warehouse, we have, again, a warehouse area and dedicated office space. So someone making a SIP call, it'll start from the phone going to the 9000 M2 amplifier, and you can use that for this application. And then being powered, then to the DA250, which you're going to power the speakers and maybe throw in a volume controls within the office. You might want to control the volume a little bit. Now, when it comes to the warehouse, they're going to have, so from the DA250, it's going to go to the actual horns itself, maybe like the CS761B. So what audio features are needed for a restaurant / bar, store, anything similar like that? So again, it comes down to background music, the paging system, and in some cases, how that system is controlled, because the user might want to control it a different way, maybe just through an iPad or something like that. All right. So one thing to also consider is, where will the system be used? What type of business is this? Is this a like daycare where if they would want very soft music, if any music at all? Is this just a place where they don't want music and it's just straight? You need to make certain announcements at a certain time, maybe like the airport, and so on. So there's many examples of different businesses. How many zones are there going to be? So when I say how many zones are going to be, I mean how many different areas need different controlled music. So just because, for example, there's 5 rooms, doesn't mean there's 5 zones. Not unless those 5 rooms want to control their music differently, or maybe even play different stuff at a time, then it's 5 zones. Otherwise, if they want to play all the same thing, it's just 1 zone and it's 5 rooms in it. So it's good to be able to distinguish between zones, or you just have 1 room or 2. The size of the facility will matter. Speaker cables can only run so far. So if it's a very large facility, you might then need to start considering maybe sending some of the sound through IP, because sending it IP wise, you can go a greater distance that way. Now, the ceiling heights and the type of ceiling will also matter, just depending on the type of speakers you want to use. Every speaker, they will have different mounting options. So knowing the type of ceiling and how high it is will let you know what kind of speakers you want to look into, what kind of speakers you may want to use for this case scenario. And again, how loud will this system be? Knowing the expected ambient noise is crucial. Sports bars, they're loud in most cases. There's a Raptors game going on or any sort of sports game. For fine dining, it doesn't need to be too loud. This needs to be some moderate level where people still want to be able to hear themselves talk, but if there's no talking, they hear maybe smooth jazz or something. Another thing to consider is the ambient levels consistent or constant. Is it always going to be this loud, or is it loud like this on certain days? They're not. The paging volume and BGM volume, those would be two different volumes as well. But in most cases, you're going to have paging and BGM. You want BGM to have high priority than. So you want paging to have high priority than BGM. So in this case, how will the speakers be utilized? Like I said again, is this coming from the ceiling? Is this coming from the wall? Is it going to be flung? These are big factors to consider. All right, do you need subwoofers? Is it going to be outdoors? If it's going to be outdoors, then instantly you're going to need to use weather resistant speakers. You don't want to use speakers that are only meant for indoors, as they're not made for the outside. The power and distance required. Again, this will matter on how many speakers you use, but they're tapped at, and the dispersion angles. So all these factors come into play. So as spoken before, what amplifier power and wiring is required. That will for sure depend on the number of speakers and what you tap each of these speakers at. Right, because you have 5 speakers, you can tap those 5 speakers depending on what they are. If they're PC580s, they can be tapped at 5 watts. That could be 25 watts more, or maybe they're tapped at 2 watts each. So knowing how many speakers and what each one of them are tapped at will give you your total number of power required, and knowing your total amount of power required will let you choose the amplifier that you need to choose. When you're choosing an amplifier, you want to spec it towards 80% power, ideally. You don't want to go to 100%. And if there's any changes, it's not recommended. Always 80. Noting if it's a small area, you're gonna need less distance, which means less wiring. And like I said before, each speaker taps will depend on the distance speaker from the audience. Yeah, what type of sounds are required? Are you having multiple audio sources? How many multiple audio sources? That's something to consider as every amp. They're only taking so many, so knowing how many, if you're having multiple audio sources, that may be a factor. Is it Bluetooth? Is it just a music player, television? Do you need the ability to mute BGM music when paging? That's something else to keep in mind. And with paging, you're paging through a microphone. This microphone doesn't need phantom power, or this microphone not need phantom power. You should know if the mic needs phantom power. That means whatever you connect that mic to will have to be able to power that mic. If a mic that needs phantom power is plugged into a regular mic input that cannot get phantom power, you're not going to get an output from that. So that is a very important thing to keep in mind. So in retail spaces, you'll typically see, so in the head end, you'll see like maybe a 9000 M2. If it's small, or maybe you might see the BG series. So these are a few of the product line that you might see around in a retail. Then when it comes to the speakers here, and for Bluetooth, it'll always be the MW41BT as this square you see to the left. So this is an example of a store. In this store, you have music and you have paging. And in this particular case, you got music and paging going into the 9000 M2. With that unit can have it so that when paging happens, the music conduct to a certain level or go completely off. And then those levels can be controlled with the remote volume, which can be placed anywhere in the store, maybe near the cash register or in the office. It's up to the store. And then what will be powering the speakers and sub, or maybe just pure speakers, will be this DA250TH, the power amplifier. This is a frequently used combo for any retail stores. So for this example, this is a cafe/bar. In this case, they're using the amplifier A-812D. In this case, they have So they have aux, let's say that's coming from their phone, tablet, and generally a tab is playing music, probably from like Spotify, most likely. So aux will go in great here. Maybe they still have a music player in case they want to play something on a CD, right? But you still have the paging capabilities. And these paging capabilities can still duck and take priority over the music if need be. Or if they don't want it to duck, they don't have to have it duck the audio. You can just play alongside with the music. And then what's good with this amplifier that you don't need a power amp because it has it built in, so it can power the speakers. It's with it, so it's all in one unit. And if you have a sub, you can connect that to this as well. So in this restaurant example, here we have, say we have maybe 4 separate areas. We got the bar to the left, the little center area, I guess called the main dining. You got the outside, and maybe then just these orange couches could be another zone. For the MA725, you have control of 4 different zones. And with that, it can still let have aux, so if it's playing music through phone, tablet, any sort of device like that, any music player, paging again could still take priority over. And then another good thing is that how you can control this, you don't just need to be at the units. You can control this you control volumes from your phone or tablet or from any external device too. So you have different options of adjusting volume with this, and that could also be a priority because sometimes maybe the bartenders just want to turn up or down the volume in their area, which they can do that with this. So in this restaurant, we have 4 different zones. Just previously, but I stated previously, yeah, the MA725, you could control that via your phone or tablet. So you got one zone thing using F1300 BTs, wide dispersion speakers. And then you have another zone, PC580 are used. The center area using HS1200 WTs. And then you got a dining area using pendant speakers, the P304 PK. So just as I was stating, using the MA725 for this application works great, and it's quite easy to control. Accessing volumes from a simple electric phone. So now our IP-A1 series, which is great for paging, and it can also do background music. And this does change the game a little bit because you have multi-band zoning, SIP phone integration, SIP broadcasting with DMS capabilities, 2-way communication, where that can be very important sometimes. You might want to the paging area, but then you want them to talk back to you. So that 2-way communication can be very useful in many cases. You have priority management, audio protocol conversations, and internal audio files. So if you need to set maybe a bell scheduler or play certain files at a certain time within our IP-A1 series, you can do that. So in this case, this is a warehouse where we had a hybrid of IP-A1 and just regular analog phone, analog speakers. Starting from, if you say you're paging from the NSP80 MS1, and then that will go to our IP-A1 PG, our paging gateway, which will then, if it's trying to go to, say, the office, it will go to the the IP-A1AF, which will then bring that down to balance audio for the DA250FH, which is going to our IP-A1 SC15. So this is going to be paging to our warehouse. And this is the path it's going. Say, for example, now if we want to page the office instead, we will go from the NSP80 MS1 to the IP-A1 PG paging gateway, but then it's going to go to this IP-A1 AF, which will be connected to this BG2035, which is powering the speakers for the office area now. So this system is a great way of showing how IP-A1 can integrate with older systems.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Sound. TOA.